Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emma Schwartz, and I am Vice Chair of the Agency Operations Committee. Chairman Ricky Raven is unable to join us today. It is 11:31 a.m., and I'd like to call the July 22nd Agency Operations Committee meeting to order. This meeting is being held via video conference. Please be aware that although we are meeting via video conference call, this meeting is still being broadcast via the internet. Before we begin, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome those joining us via video conference and ask that they observe the following etiquette. Please state your name before you speak, mute your phone when not speaking, and please keep background noise to a minimum. Members, we will begin with a roll call to ensure that we have a quorum. When I call your name, please respond to confirm that you are on the video call. Javed Anwar.
I hear.
I see Mr. Anwar on the call. I would think that that is a yes. Mr. Cody Campbell.
Here.
Dr. Fred Farias.
Here.
And myself, Emma Schwartz. Please record in the meeting minutes that we have a quorum. Moving on to agenda item number 2, which is approval of the minutes from the April 23rd, 2020 Agency Operations Committee. Do you have a motion? Do I have a motion for the approval of these meeting minutes?
So moved.
I think that was a motion by Dr. Farias and a
And
second by.
I'll second. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you are voting for or against the motion. Those in favor say for, and those opposed say no. Mr. Anwar.
For.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell.
For.
Dr. Farias.
For.
And I also vote for. The motion passes. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item number 3, which is public testimony. We do not have anyone registered to testify today, so we will go on to the next item. Agenda item 4A is a report on grants and contracts, including those exceeding $1 million. This item does not require any action. Members, the reports were included with the agenda materials that you received prior to the meeting. Mr. Bill Franz, General Counsel, and Ms. Linda Natal, Director of Contracts and Grant Management, are available if you have any questions. Do we have any questions? Hearing none, we will move on to the next agenda item. Agenda item 4B is update on the fiscal year 2020 Key Securities Initiatives Implementation Roadmap. This item does not require any action. Ms. Jen Sun, Assistant Commissioner for Information Solutions and Services and Chief Information Officer, and Mr. Peter Dunton, Information Security Officer, will present this agenda item and are available to answer any of your questions. Ms. Sun.
Thank you, Ms. Schwartz, and board members, good morning. Today, we're going to give a presentation on the fiscal year 2020 Cybersecurity Initiatives Implementation Roadmap. Next slide, please. So during this presentation, I will first give an overview of the agency cybersecurity framework and brief the board on our overall strategy to mature the agency's security controls. Then my colleague, Mr. Peter Dunton, Agency Information Security Officer, will give a progress report on the implementation of the fiscal year 20 security initiatives and discuss the plan for moving forward. Next slide, please. Next slide. The core mission of the agency cybersecurity framework is to assess and improve our agency's ability to prevent, detect, and respond to cyber incidents. The framework uses business drivers to guide cybersecurity activities and consider cybersecurity as part of the agency's overall risk management process. It aims to meet the agency's unique business needs by taking its people, process, and technology into consideration. Next slide, please. As a state agency, the coordinating board is required by the statute to go through a biennial review of its information security program for compliance with the standards set forth by the Texas cybersecurity framework. Based on the most recent assessment conducted by AT&T Cybersecurity back in 2019, the current maturity level of the agency security framework is, which means the agency has well-documented policies and procedures that cover all the controls outlined in the framework. Next slide, please. The board has expressed very strong support for implementing the assessment recommendations to improve the agency security posture. For us to move to the maturity level of 4, the security team will need to establish a formal risk management framework to measure and evaluate risks based on the agency's risk tolerance and integrate improvements beyond the requirements of applicable regulations. New policies and user trainings will be introduced to ensure consistent data classification, especially for unstructured data. And we will implement technical solutions for data classification as well. Next slide, please. Next one. So with the goal to continue to improve the agency security posture, at the beginning of each fiscal year, the Information Solutions and Services Division publishes a security initiatives implementation roadmap. During the planning phase, we take into consideration the goals and business priorities of the agency, use the recommendations received from the biennial assessment, and identify both opportunities and risks. The output is a relevant and actionable implementation roadmap, which comes with a prioritized list of projects. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the fiscal year 2020 security initiatives implementation roadmap, which we presented back in October 2019 to the board. Now I'm going to ask my colleague, Mr. Peter Danton, Information Security Officer, to give the board on the latest progress achieved by the team and also talk about the next steps. Peter. Peter.
Mr. Danton, you may be muted.
Yeah, I was trying to see if Peter joined the meeting. Okay, so if Peter's not at the meeting, I can cover the content on behalf of Peter, and while we're waiting for him to join the meeting.
Please do.
He's
Okay.
on the meeting. Here.
He's just, we're not able to hear him.
Oh, okay.
Good afternoon. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon. My name is Peter Danton. I am the Information Security Officer. Next slide, please. We'll now give you a progress report on the assessment and recommendations that came with that report. Now, first progress I want to report on is the procurement and deployment of a web application filter. We had secured funding from the last legislative session to purchase it through the managed security services of the state data center. We are among the first state agencies to actually deploy this in a data center. We completed this project in the second quarter of FY20. We have an ongoing effort to place agency website under its protection. In fact, just this weekend, we were able to put the agency main site behind the protection of this web application firewall. One of the advantages of this firewall is it remediates many web application vulnerabilities without actually modifying or software or web applications. The second thing that we've done is we have procured the security incident and event management system. Again, we've secured funding for this from the last legislative session, and we have completed this project in the first quarter of FY20. Presently, we are working to tune this system to eliminate false positives and to be better in tune with our systems and how we work. This tool is central, one of the main tools to inform our risk management framework. Next slide, please. Another, sorry, one more back. One more, please. One more. Another major progress we have made. So we have deployed multi-factor authentication for all our Office 365 resources. Multi-factor authentication is perhaps by far the most recommended cybersecurity control that any organization can implement. I'm very proud to say, with the help of everyone in the agency, we were able to deploy this for all types of users. Typically, this mechanism is deployed only for administrators, but we are able to do this for all users. This includes non-employees that have accounts with us for Office 365 resources. And we achieved this in the second quarter of this fiscal year. Ongoing as well is our data classification and data loss prevention. Again, this was a recommendation from our assessments. And what this does is it allows users, employees that work with data, to actively classify data, to label data for what it is. Our agency has 4 classification levels. And although we've had that policy for some time, there hasn't actually been a mechanism to actually label files and documents. Now we do. And we are actually in the middle of training everyone in the agency on how to use that. And as it says there, it is ongoing for fourth quarter this fiscal year. Another achievement that we have is our security awareness training. We are among the first 5 state agencies to gain certification for our homegrown awareness training as per HB 3834. Hard to believe, but it's actually time to recertify that, and we're taking steps to do that. Next slide, please. As you see here, this is a maturity level forecasting. That assessment that Jijin mentioned reports on a maturity level, and based on our progress, based on the things that we have done, I have made a self-assessment of where we may be on particular security controls. For example, data classification, the first one there. I think we have progressed from 3 in FY19 to 3.5 based on our achievement in having deployed data classification labeling. Another thing I might want to point out is our risk management, risk assessment framework. That is an ongoing effort that we're having. I think we're making good progress with that. What that will do is allow for a dashboard for management to see where our risk exposures are. Another highlight that I want to bring up there is our security awareness and privacy training. All that is due to our compliance with HB 3834. Another big one is the second to the last one, the cybersecurity incident response. Later on in August, in this fiscal year, we are having a tabletop exercise on a ransomware scenario. And what this will do is validate our policies and procedures in responding to such an incident. As you may have heard in the news, ransomware is quite popular. Many institutions of higher education, as well as state agencies, have been repeatedly victimized by this. And so what we learned from that is not that it happens, it's how you respond to them. And so this exercise that we're going to have in August should better give us an idea on where we are on our response. And that is why we gave ourselves a higher mark there, an improvement from before. Next slide, please. For our next steps, I would recommend that we keep that appropriation that we have. It is the main reason we have been able to achieve what we have from the assessment of level 3 in our maturity level to going forward. That is essential to have. It is essential to keep our security incident and event management system, as well as our web application firewall system. We also need it for ongoing security assessments, as well as to complete our identity and access management efforts. One thing that we must have that came out of that recommendation is to designate a privacy officer. This role is vitally essential as the agency seek to position itself as a data resource for higher education and the general public. Next slide, please. We also need to fully implement our risk management framework. One of the key initiatives of this is to involve management and executive level in understanding where our risk exposure are and make decisions based on that. Once again, we are ongoing with our deployment for data classification. This is particularly important as we move our resources to SharePoint and OneDrive. And we also need to review our governance and policy process. With COVID-19, a lot of things that we used to rely on within our network has changed somewhat as people work from home. Along with that, we need to adapt our policies to make sure that the devices and networks that our users use to connect to our data is secure. Next slide, please. And that is all I have, and it concludes my report. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Well, cybersecurity and data security has been so important for many years, but in this new online environment, it's even more important. So thank you for that great work and that report. Members, do you have any questions for Ms. Sun or Mr. Denton? Hearing none, we will move on to the next item. Agenda item 4C is the update on the performance evaluation process for direct reports to the Commissioner of Higher Education. This item does not require any action. Harrison Keller, Commissioner of Higher Education, will present this agenda item and be available to answer questions. Commissioner?
So thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today on this topic. And I believe one of the most important aspects of organizational leadership is performance management. I take this responsibility very seriously. As you all know, we've brought on a number of new members of our executive team back in February, which seems like a long time ago now. And now that we're several months into our tenures with the agency, Chairman Stedman and Chairman Raven had asked that I provide an update on how I plan to evaluate and measure the success of our team. So first, let me begin by just providing a very brief overview of how the coordinating board handles performance evaluation. So at the beginning of the current fiscal year, the coordinating board transitioned from a legacy paper-based system to an online performance management module in the state centralized accounting and payroll and personnel system. So CAPS provides cloud-based software for Texas state agencies. It gives us a more user-friendly, secure, updatable system that we can scale. We already use the CAPS system for payroll, for time and effort, and for hiring, so it was natural progression for the agency. And then the performance management module allows supervisors to define evaluation criteria, to schedule midpoint reviews, and to conduct 360-degree evaluation. So as an agency, we're going to be using this system for the first time this year. So the whole agency is going to be learning along with me. Now, as it relates to our executive team and to the agency as a whole, I'd like to talk just very briefly about the guiding principles that I'm going to follow. First, a strong emphasis on partnerships and collaboration. So I've made clear from the beginning that one of my highest priorities for this agency is to commit to being an effective partner and resource for institutions, for the legislature, for other stakeholders, including employers, funders, and other external stakeholders. Second, I would say commitment to our obligations. So of course, as a state agency, we've got certain core obligations we have to meet. And I'm going to continue working closely with the agency leadership to ensure that we're increasingly efficient and effective as an agency, and that we're committed to continuous improvement. And on that last note, the third thing I'd emphasize would be improvement in innovation. So since we all joined the coordinating board, I've asked the executive team to put a significant focus on innovation and continuing improvement in our tools and our data and our programs and how we're working together. And that's going to be an important part of transitioning the agency so that we can be a more effective resource for all our stakeholders. Of course, within the agency leadership, I place a high value on effective communication, candor, collegiality, as well as their sound judgment and counsel and development of strong relationships externally. And I want to say before I wrap up, just that I'm very proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish and our executive team's been able to accomplish over the first few months of their tenure. Our new executive team didn't even get their first 90 days in the office before they had to transition to working remotely. And so as we look back just in those few months, Melissa Henderson's work with our foundation and external funders to secure more than $2 million so far in private support for institutions, for our students, for our major initiatives, while also playing a key leadership role in state efforts to provide childcare for first responders and essential personnel. Lori Fai's initiative in standing up an incredibly ambitious and groundbreaking educational and workforce data initiative for the state, and standing up a new project management team with her division. Ray Martinez's leadership in coordinating the agency's COVID-19 responses and resources, while also shepherding important long-term initiatives like our transfer initiative and improving advising for students across the state. And of course, Ray Rodriguez's invaluable leadership and counsel to me as Chief of Staff and with our budget office with financial aid. I'd also like to say I really appreciate Mark Pohl's invaluable and steady counsel through our work with external audit, but also serving as a trusted resource to other institutions that are trying to navigate incredibly complex issues. And finally, I appreciate Bill Franz's ongoing counsel and support, and appreciate Nicole Henderson's immediate contributions to our team as our new general counsel. So I'm very excited about our agency's leadership team and how it's come together, and I look forward to working with these committed colleagues in the months ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. This has certainly been an unprecedented time with so much change at the agency and so many new staff and an unprecedented pandemic. So thank you for your leadership of such a strong team as well. Members, do you have any questions for the Commissioner?
Yeah, Ms. Ford. Okay, so Commissioner, so what is the timing of the reviews, and what if any salary adjustments would be made? If you just got to go into that just sort of generally.
So we would go into that in the as we go into the fall. So we generally the agency would conduct its reviews, so those would be complete before our October meeting. So any recommendations about salaries would be made in the new fiscal year, and when we have a better sense of what our situation is. Of course, it's highly dynamic right now. We've been asked to propose 5% cuts, and it's entirely possible that the agency could be prepared to propose plans for additional cuts to our budget. But so we'll be working on that and wrapping it up before the board would reconvene in October.
But that's probably going to be the annual cycle. Will be sort of after the fiscal year starts. That's when you'll have the reviews. Okay.
That's correct. Of course, with the important exception of the Commissioner General Counsel and the auditor who report directly to the board.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Madam Chair?
Yes, please, Dr. Farias.
Yeah, I'd like to just publicly made known that I appreciate the Commissioner and his staff. The Commissioner and Ray Rodriguez are always available. Ray and I were on the phone last night after hour 8 o'clock in the evening, and Commissioner and I, and of course Chairman Stedman, are on the phone many hours, and even in evenings and weekends. So I do appreciate that, Commissioner. And also, since this is our last AOC committee meeting with Mr. Franz, I wanted to publicly thank him for all that he has done for the agency over the years. I know we have a board meeting. His next board meeting will be his last one, but as an agency and being part of AOC, it's important that that we give recognition again to Mr. Franz for all his extra time and effort as well over the years to the coordinating board.
I would concur. Thank you very much, Mr. Franz, for your service. Are there any other questions or comments from the members? Hearing none, we will move on to the next item. Agenda item 4D is consideration of adopting amendments to the board operating policies and procedures. Members, the proposed changes are noted in red in the draft board operating policies and procedures document that was sent to you prior to this meeting. In particular, you can refer to pages 10, 11, and 14. These changes generally update our policies and procedures to reflect the new organizational structure of the agency, and our board committees. Ray Rodriguez, Deputy Commissioner and Chief of Staff, is available if you have any questions. Hearing none, do I have a motion to adopt the amendments to the board operating policies and procedures?
So moved.
Cody, Mr. Campbell, do I have a second?
Second.
Dr. Farias. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you are for or against the motion. Mr. Anwar. I'll return to Mr. Anwar. Mr. Campbell.
For.
Dr. Farias.
For.
I vote in favor as well. And I'll try for Mr. Anwar again. All right, I believe we have the majority of the committee. The motion passes. Agenda item 5A is review of the fiscal year 2020 financial report to the board. This item does not require any action. Mr. Ken Martin, Assistant Commissioner for Financial Services and Chief Financial Officer, will present this item to the committee and is available for questions. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Ms. Schwartz and all committee members, and good morning. This item comes to you every quarter. This is a financial report of the agency's position in various programs. This report is through the third quarter, so September 1st through May 31st, 2020. I did want to note, as the Commissioner mentioned, we had been asked to propose 5% budget reductions. This does not include those in the budget amounts. These still are the original budget amounts. But it is pending legislative budget board approval. So once we assume we do get approval and no other changes are to be made, then we will update this report accordingly for the next meeting. I did also want to walk through in this report the various items. I don't have any item to specific call out and note, but I did want to provide a highlight on 2 bond sales that occurred in June based on the October resolution that the board approved. In June, we issued new money bonds for approximately $100 million. That is to fund next academic year's student loans for the 2021 academic year. And with that, we had a 2.25% true interest cost. That is the lowest I've seen, the lowest I can go back for over 20 years that has been able to be achieved. That allows us to lower the interest rate on the student loans. It'll be charged to students from 5.2% to 2%. That's quite an accomplishment that hopefully will benefit students in the future financially. The second item was refinancing of our 2010 bond series. The 2010 bond series had 10 years of bonds that were paid and had 14 years remaining through various series. Those bonds were paid off through the issuance of new bonds that we were able to get a $26 million cash flow savings. So we went from $132 million of principal and interest, what we would have paid over the 14 years, to just a little over $96 million. So quite a substantial savings for the program. Combined through other refinancings that we have done over the last 2 years, the total is now a little over $80 million of cash flow savings for the future by being able to lower our future debt payments today. So with those actions, it helps strengthen the financial loan program for its future and benefit students of Texas. With that, I'll conclude my comment and open it up for any questions.
There's some good news in there. Are there any questions from the members?
I have a comment, please.
Yes, please, Doctor.
Yes, so Ken, I see that you're at the agency and you have very good physical distancing, which is good. But my comment is, can you give us an update, since this is the AOC meeting, agency operations? How are we doing with the building and the state agencies moving into the future for the coordinating board?
Absolutely. Happy to provide that update. We have been in contact with the Texas Facilities Commission, though I have to admit since March, changes or updates have not been as quick as we'd like them to be. But our last communication approximately 2 weeks ago was that the Facilities Commission would be engaging an architect to get with the agency and help determine floor space, floor utilization, as well as the number of floors that we would actually be occupying within the building. We have put together an estimated cost list to provide to the Facilities Commission when it is requested for their legislative appropriations request, to provide the estimate of moving costs, signage, window coverings, cabling, a lot of other infrastructure build out that would be needed for us to actually occupy the building once the building's complete.
Thank you. And one other question. When is the next time we go out for bids at the coordinating board for bond counsel?
We just completed early this year. I came to the board for an RFP for bond counsel and financial advisor. We completed the RFP process and we received board chair, board vice chair, and AOC chair approval for both vendors. McCall, Parkhurst, and Horton was selected for the next year. So they'll be our bond counsel starting September 1st through 8/31 of 2021. They'll have a 1-year term on their contract, and then we'll go out to RFP again. And Hilltop Securities is the financial advisor that was selected for a 2-year period, and they will start 9/1 of this September and through a 2-year period through 22.
No, I understand that, but when is the timeline? When is the next bid go out was a question.
January, I will come to the board for the January AOC and board meeting, of which to request approval to issue an RFP for bond counsel specifically. So January, and then typically we have about a 2-3 month period for review and selection.
Great, that answered the question. Thank you, sir.
Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair, I'm not on the committee. Can I ask a question? Have they identified which building we are moving into, or the exact location, or is it just in the general complex area at this point?
They have identified the specific building, and it's the first building that will be completed. There are 2 scheduled. This one is the George H.W. Bush building, and it is tentatively scheduled. I have not seen an update for a couple months, but tentatively scheduled for summer of 2022. And that is the building that we're currently assigned to.
And do we know which floors we're going on at this point, or that's up for grabs?
That is, we do not. I believe the intent is that for Facilities Commission, once we engage an architect, that they lay out the floor space we would require. That would help them determine the number of floors, or would it be a floor, floor and a half, 2 full floors, and then they would provide floor assignments from that point once they have other agencies determined as well.
And do we know what other agencies are going in this building at this time?
We have a list of several. I do not have them with me, but we can provide that if necessary. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any more questions? If not, thank you very much for that report, Mr. Martin, and those updates. We will move on now to
Ms. Schwartz,
yes.
I've got a technical question. So I noticed, so there's Mary, and then when Ken starts talking, then he comes up. If we had done a hybrid meeting, would it be like this? Would there be any? And I'm thinking really October. Would there be any difference? That is it programmed where if one person talks who's actually physically present in the meeting, the camera goes on? It's a technical question. We can answer it later, but I'm just, again, I think those in-person meetings, assuming the COVID thing, sort of maybe dies down to a reasonable level, are very valuable, but it will be hybrid. Is that the way it would work, or do we have to do something entirely different?
This is the way it would work, sir. The camera would be set in the middle of the dais, and it would pick up whichever board members were present.
So it could have worked theoretically for this meeting, just the way from a technical standpoint. Is that right?
It could do, sir. The only difference is that if you're attending in person, obviously you're looking at a computer and you're looking at a Zoom meeting.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That was my technical question. Thank you.
question. Very good question. Thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item 6A. This is discussion of the audit of the agency-wide financial statements for the fiscal year ended August 31st, 2019 by KPMG LLP. This item does not require any action. Ms. Susan Warren, audit partner with KPMG, will present this item to the committee and be available for questions. Ms. Warren.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Swartz. This is Susan Warren with KPMG. I also have Shannon Canals, the manager with KPMG, on the phone. Thank you for allowing us to present the results of the 2019 audit. I would like to start by just letting everybody know that we actually started this audit in person, but had to go remote for the last 80% of it. So I do appreciate all the help from the coordinating board, who was also remote. Our primary contacts were Zen, Mark, and Ken, but obviously touched many different people in the agency. So it was an undertaking, but one we kept on track and on schedule. So thank everybody for that. The next page kind of gives you the agenda. Really what we're here today to talk about is the results of the audit. So moving straight to the next page, we'll get right into that. The scope of the audit, as a reminder, was the financial audit for August of 19. From our planning conversation that we had, there's been no significant changes between planning and the actual execution of the audit. We did issue a clean or unmodified opinion, which is what the agency and the committee so desires. There was no outstanding matters, so said another way, the reports have been issued. The significant accounting policies are described in note 1. The key point here is that there was no significant changes from prior year. In other words, there was no changes in accounting standards that need to be called out. Moving to the next page, there were no new disclosures that needed to be disclosed. One back, there we go. From a risk assessment perspective, at planning, we talked about some of these areas you see here, the allowance, IT, debt covenants. You can also see the accuracy of the expenses being paid for the grants and the revenues coming in from appropriations. Those were the larger areas where the dollars really are, if you will, and the potential risk that we focused our audit on. And what those two blocks there tell you is that we didn't find anything out of the ordinary to report. And the last line, as I mentioned, there was no new accounting standards for 19. This page kind of gives you a summary of audit entries and material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. Those first 3 boxes all say nothing. So that's important to know. So said another way, the financial information that Ken and his team are reporting to you was substantially correct. We didn't make any changes to that, and the control structure was found to be functioning as designed. We do have related party responsibilities. We didn't notice anything significant there. There is a couple of related parties disclosed in the footnotes, but by no means are they material. And then we do always confirm to you that we were independent during the execution of the engagement. Next page. So these are the remaining items that if we occurred, we would report. And there are a couple on here I'll just draw your attention to. Starting on the left, we didn't find any illegal acts or fraud, no non-compliance, no going concern. There are a couple of non-GAAP items that are inconsequential to the financial statements. What that means is you have a choice in how you apply certain accounting standards. There are preferred methods by the accounting standard setters, and there are sometimes reasons why management elects not to do that. So we have to track those, but they're not material. There were 2 subsequent events that we did disclose. One we just talked about a little bit about lease extension and relocation, and then of course COVID-19. There is a generic, I say generic because it's very broad, footnote that basically who had declared a pandemic, and that the agency was assessing the impact on future activities and revenue streams and things like that. So just letting people know that that was out there. All the other items on this page say none, so we didn't have anything to report to you. And in the actual written report, which was provided to you, the very last item lets you know that the management representation, which is what the team signed so that we could issue the financial statements, is there for your review. The remaining slides in the deck are just a reminder of the responsibilities of both KPMG, management, and the committee. They're there for your just reference. I don't intend to walk through those, but I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Members, do you have any questions for Ms. Warren?
So Susan, does it get any better? Or could it
No,
get
sir, it does not.
No, I didn't.
This is the best audit I can report. I love it.
Okay. That's great.
What you also mentioned, the challenge of going from an in-person audit to a substantially 80% audit being virtual. So thank you for working with the staff, and thank you for the staff and management for facilitating that. I know that to be on time, regardless of those changes, is a significant accomplishment. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Warren? Then thank you very much, Ms. Warren, for your report. Moving on to agenda item 6B, which is consideration of adopting the commissioner's recommendation to the committee regarding the approval to, number 1, issue a request for qualifications to conduct the audit of the agency-wide financial statements for fiscal year ended August 31st, 2020, and 2, enter into a contract with the selected auditing firm subject to the approval of board chair, vice chair, and chair of the Committee on Agency Operations, with options to renew the contract for up to 3 additional years. Mr. Mark Pell, Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, and Mr. Paul Maynard, Assistant Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this item and are available if you have any questions. Are there any questions? Hearing none, I will now ask for 2 motions. Do I have a motion to approve issuing a request for qualifications to conduct the audit of the agency-wide financial statements for fiscal year ended August 31st, 2020?
So moved.
I have a motion by Dr. Farias.
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Campbell. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you are voting for or against the motion. Mr. Anwar.
For.
Mr. Campbell.
For.
Dr. Farias.
For.
And I as well vote for. The motion passes. The second motion is, members, we need to approve entering into a contract with the selected auditing firm, subject to the approval of board chair, vice chair, and chair of the Committee on Agency Operations, with options to renew the contract for up to 3 additional years. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Campbell, and a second?
Second.
By Dr. Farias. Members, again, when I call your name, please state whether you are for or against the motion. Mr. Anwar.
For.
Mr. Campbell.
For.
Mr. Farias, Dr. Farias.
For.
And myself, Emma Schwartz, is for. The motion passes. Agenda item C is consideration of adopting the commissioner's recommendation to the committee related to the annual internal audit plan for fiscal year 2021. Members, these materials were also included with the package that you received prior to the meeting. Mr. Mark Pell, Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this item and is available to answer any questions. Only question I have is, I know that many audit schedules have been disrupted because of the pandemic. Do we foresee those kinds of issues arising at the board?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are you able to hear me? I hope. Yes, it's been a challenge going virtual with the audit environment, but definitely would like to thank the commissioner and staff, as well as our higher education partners. Everybody's been very helpful, and we've been able to continue to move forward. For this particular item, I'm seeking your approval for our 2021 audit work plan. Audit standards and state law require that we present this to you each year for your approval based on an assessment of risk. That risk includes quantitative risk, such as the dollar magnitude of the agency's various programs, as well as qualitative aspects such as your input, agency management input, and other stakeholders. The plan that you have in your materials talks about how we address those risks that are the most significant to the agency. For example, we have work scheduled in high-risk areas such as cybersecurity, which has been discussed on this meeting today, as well as the agency's student loan program. We also follow up on prior outstanding recommendations made by us and by the state auditor's office. The other thing that's in your packet is a 7-year look back document. This is how we show you a perspective on what has and has not been audited over the years, and it kind of gives you a visual of the things that we've been able to cover and the things that that are likely to pop up going forward, given our available resources. That's a very quick summary of the plan that you have, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the members? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to adopt the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the annual internal audit plan for fiscal year 2021?
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Campbell and I believe a second by Dr.
Yeah.
Faria.
Correct.
Great. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you are voting for or against the motion. Mr. Anwar,
For.
Mr. Campbell,
For.
Dr. Farias,
For.
and I am a Schwartz. I'm for the motion, and so the motion passes. Moving on to agenda item 60. This is an update on internal audit reports and activities. This item also does not require any action. Mr. Mark Pell, Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, and Mr. Paul Mayert, Assistant Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this update to the committee and be available for questions. Again, Mr. Pell and Mr. Mayert.
Thank you, Ms. Schwartz. This is a very short update for this particular meeting. We completed one engagement since the prior meeting in April, and that's in your materials. The engagement is part of our ongoing internal quality assurance process that we have to basically assess ourselves periodically and using a self-assessment methodology. And so that one was completed. And in the interest of time, to save a little bit of time for compliance monitoring, unless you have any questions, I'll be happy to move forward.
Are there any questions? If not, we can move on to agenda item 7A. That is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendations to the committee relating to the annual compliance monitoring plan for fiscal year 2021. Members, the fiscal year 2021 compliance monitoring plan was included in your materials that you received prior to the meeting. Again, Mr. Mark Pell, Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, and Mr. Paul Mayert, Assistant Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, are available if you have any questions.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. For this item, I'd like to turn it over to my assistant, Mr. Mayert. Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Pale. We are seeking the committee's approval on our 2021 annual compliance monitoring plan. Similar to our internal audit plan, audit standards and state law require that we present a work plan based upon a comprehensive assessment of risk. In the case of compliance monitoring, the risk assessment categories are based upon statutory guidelines as noted on the audit plan. Those guidelines include the amount of funds allocated, other required audits, internal controls, recency of the last desk review or site visit, past misuse of funds or misreported data, and in regard to data verification, whether the data reported is used for determining funding. These statutory categories allow us to risk assess in a quantitative manner, for instance, by considering the dollar magnitude of various programs, as well as by important qualitative aspects, such as the input from management and other stakeholders. We also stratify potential projects by dollar magnitude and type of institution, so that we select from a broader cross-section of institutions rather than just the largest ones. The plan in your materials identifies the projects we plan to conduct in the upcoming year. We plan to spend most of our time with new risk-based projects split evenly between formula funding projects and financial aid projects. We have also set aside time for 3 additional areas: time to follow up on recommendations from prior projects, time to complete projects that we moved from the current year plan, and those were primarily moved to accommodate changes at institutions, and 3, time to begin compliance reviews for the newly mandated reports regarding sexual misconduct state reporting from institutions of higher education. I'd also like to note that at this point, our plan anticipates doing all of our work remotely as desk reviews and does not include site visits to any institutions. However, if the need arises or conditions with regard to COVID-19 change, we will obviously adjust accordingly. I would be happy to address any questions, and I seek your approval for our plan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Are there any questions of the committee? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adopt the commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the annual compliance monitoring plan for fiscal year 2021?
So moved.
Dr. Farias
I'll second.
and Mr. Campbell seconds. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you are voting for or against the motion. Mr. Anwar,
For.
Mr. Campbell,
For.
Dr. Farias,
For.
and I, Emma Schwartz, vote for as well, and the motion passes. Agenda item 6B is an update on compliance monitoring reports and activities. This item does not require any action. Mr. Pell, Director of Internal Audit, will present this item to the committee and be available for questions. Mr.
Thank you. Thank you again, Ms. Schwartz. And for this item, we'll close out once again with Mr. Mayor. Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Pale. Thank you, committee. We completed 12 projects since our prior AOC meeting in April, and each of the reports are included in your materials. Just one of the engagements had reportable findings and recommendations. That engagement was for Temple College and resulted in one recommendation to improve information security controls over student enrollment information. Audit trails over key enrollment data, such as class meeting days and times, were not established to ensure the reliability and integrity of the data used for formula funding decision-making purposes. Temple College immediately resolved the issue by adjusting the enrollment data system to capture and retain change history for critical enrollment data. And that concludes my compliance monitoring update, and would be happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? If not, this concludes the Agency Operations Committee. And the last thing we have on the agenda is to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And I'll second.
Dr. Farias made the motion and Mr. Campbell seconded the motion. Members, when I call your name, please state whether you are voting for or against the motion. Mr. Anwar,
For.
Mr. Campbell,
For.
Dr. Farias,
For.
and I, Emma Schwartz, also vote for, and the motion passes. Thank you all very much for your time today.